Hey everyone, welcome to another recording session for the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. My name is Paul Lathrop. I am the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me for the show tonight, well, we've only got two members of the staff coming along for the ride. To my right, John Richardson. Of course, he's the only Guns and Money blog, and if you haven't followed that the last few weeks, you're missing out. A lot of news about NRA has hit that blog specifically over the last week. And then also below me, Charlie Cook, riding shotgun with Charlie. And he's also got writing shotgun with Charlie. He's got Charlie's gun grabs. He's all over the place. But John and Charlie are going to be on the show doing the co-hosting duties. Joining us when we get to our interview segment in just a couple minutes is going to be Paloma Companna. Say that 5 times fast. I think, guys, let me get social media hooked up. Oh, by the way, if you are watching us on the Polite Society Podcast YouTube channel or the Polite Society Podcast Facebook page, you can comment on those live videos and we'll get those comments, get them up on the air. If you're watching us anywhere else on Facebook, you can comment. I usually get those comments, but I don't get who sent them, so your comment may make it on the air as long as it's pertinent to what we're commenting about. If you're catching us anywhere else and you've got to get a comment in, boogie on over to the YouTube or Facebook page for Polite Society Podcast. But we are up everywhere. We're on Rumble, a couple places, Getter. We're on YouTube, of course, Facebook. We're on OpsLens TV. So we're blasting out all over the place, but there's a couple ways to get your comments in. So I think, guys, it is time. If you guys are ready, I think we're going to head for the recording. And Masada Yub in 5, 4, 3.
Hey gang, this is Masad Ayub from the Pro Arms Podcast. I'm here to remind you that our podcast is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network, and I'm going to suggest you do what we do and check out the other podcasts at selfdefenseradio.net.
Treat every firearm as if it's loaded.
Never point a firearm at anything you're not willing to kill or destroy.
Keep your finger off the trigger until you are on target and ready to fire.
Always be sure of your target and what lies beyond it.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society Podcast. We're recording this one on Monday, April the 24th, 2023. I'm Paul Lathrop.
I'm John Richardson, and on tonight's show, we speak with Paloma Companna about the Gazzola versus Hochul lawsuit.
I'm Charlie Cook, and we'll talk about Nebraska becoming permitless carry state number 27. So climb aboard.
Strap in.
Hang on.
Episode 658 of the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society Podcast starts right now. All right, it is Monday night. It is 6 p.m. in the Central Time Zone. Well, 6:03 now, but it is Monday night. It's time for Polite Society Podcast. John, you're up first tonight, man. What's been up with you since the last time we've been on the air? It's been a couple of weeks.
It's been a couple of weeks, and in that time, we went to the NRA annual meeting in Indianapolis. I went to the meeting of members and toured the floor, of course, and then we spent a couple of days with relatives in northern Kentucky. I'm just really surprised at how close Indy is to everything. It was a 2-hour drive for us. And the best part of the NRA annual meeting is running into old friends, whether they're bloggers, podcasters, YouTubers, or members of the industry. So good time was had by all. How about you, Charlie?
I agree. I can't believe this. This is only the second time I've been to the NRA annual meetings, but it was great and it was busy. Keeping up with old friends, making new friends, just like you said, it really is, to me, it's the biggest family reunion that we've got. While I was there, I only filmed one episode of Riding Shotgun in Indianapolis. And as soon as I got home, I did a live stream with Matt Mallory. We had Carrie Ann O'Clair and Renee Gagne as our guests. Then I got up the next day and I headed down to Philly to film some episodes. When I came back to Massachusetts on Friday, I went out and did some sporting clays in Rhode Island. And I had a couple of classes this weekend. And then today was back to the day job. I also spent Thursday night with Paul sitting in on the Bullet, which was cool. And so, Paul, how about you?
Well, before we get to me, as we were talking on Thursday, you told me a story about some world-class schmoozing you got to do.
I may or may not have made it to the NRA Board of Directors President's Cocktail Hour. I think there are only 2 photographs to prove that I may have been there. But yes, it's great to hobnob with the hobnob with the board of directors. It's pretty fun to sneak in and crash the party.
I was going to say, what you described to me was almost like that movie, The Wedding Crashers. I mean, just,
Absolutely. Like, you walk in with a nice jacket and a dress shirt and you just wave to the security like it's no big deal. And you sit there, you sweat it, you walk by past them, and then you're good to go. Then everyone starts coming up and saying, "Oh my gosh, how did you get in here?" And you're like, "Hey, I'm Charlie. I'm Charlie. This is what I do." Yeah, exactly. I pulled the Ron Burgundy. I'm like, "Do you know who I am?" So that was a good time.
On my end, we've been doing some prep for AmCon. We're now hip deep in prep for GRPC. I had to go through and we're almost finished with this. I had to, for SAF, for the broadcast, I had to inventory every bit of tech that I have that I use for broadcasting that weekend. And boy, we filled one legal pad, double spaced, but we filled one legal pad with all the tech that I haul down there every year. Executive decisions been made, and nobody faint on me here, but this year I'm not driving. They're going to get me onto an airplane, and I am flying down to Gun Rights Policy Conference. And even worse, I'm trusting my tech equipment to a truck driver, meaning it's getting shipped. I know a lot of truck drivers. There's darn few I would trust. So,
well, I did find this out when I was flying to Indy. You cannot bring your own alcohol on the airplane, Paul. I just want you to know.
Okay. All right. Word of warning, I guess.
Exactly. Just trying to help you out, man.
I wonder if I could talk them into getting me a per diem for alcohol for the flight down. You think SAF would spring for that?
I don't know. I don't know if you can expense. You can't expense it, but maybe per diem. If you don't eat and you just have some whiskeys, I think you'll be okay.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and do this before we take off. I gotta let everybody know about Self-Defense Radio Network. All your pro freedom podcasts in one place. As you can see, we're up there on the top left. Rob Morris's Self-Defense Gun Stories is up there. Amanda Suffolk's Eye on the Target Radio. And some dude has a show up there called Riding Shotgun with Charlie, which is not just a video series on YouTube. It's also an audio podcast. New shows are going to be coming. I promise you. I know I say this every time, but there are new shows waiting to be added to the network. More will be coming. Right now, you can check out everything that's up right now at sdrn.us. You can listen right on the website, or there's subscription information. If you find something you like, You want to subscribe to it. The subscription information is right there as well. For right now, we're going to step off to our first break. When we come back, we'll speak with Paloma Companna about her lawsuit in New York. It's the lawsuit name is Gazzola versus Hochul, and we'll talk about that when we come back, right after we hear from ACLDN. Back after this.
This portion of the Polite Society podcast is brought to you by the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. If you carry a defensive handgun, you need protection from the aftermath of prosecution. Even if you do everything right, you can be the victim of an overzealous prosecutor or even be falsely accused. That is where the ACLDN comes in. They provide immediate assistance when you need it most. If you find yourself under arrest, they immediately pay bail money and the retainer for your attorney. Additional funds are available for trial and civil proceedings. Beyond the money, they have far and away the best team in the industry, providing you invaluable information and training DVDs that are included with your membership and who stand ready to work with your lawyer on your defense. People like Masad Ayub, John Farnham, James Fleming, Tom Givens, Emmanuel Capelson, Dennis Tuller, and led by network president Marty Hayes. Initial membership is only $135 for your first year, and you get 8 incredible training DVDs and other educational material when you join. If you don't have tens of thousands of dollars to defend yourself at your disposal right now, you need to be a member of the ACLDN. Go to armedcitizensnetwork.org and become a member today. And please mention that you heard about them on the Polite Society podcast.
All right, we are back. This is the interview segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining us today from North Carolina, which is not exactly where you'd expect an attorney handling a New York lawsuit to be. We'll get to that in a little bit. Paloma Companna is joining us. If you've been to Gun Rights Policy Conference in the past, you've probably run into her. She's been at many of them, spoke at a few of them. Paloma, the reason we brought you on tonight, and I want to get off with this right off the bat, could you tell us a little bit about this lawsuit, Gazzola versus Hochul?
Sure, and thanks so much for inviting me. Gazzola versus Hochul is a lawsuit that challenges one of the first ever statutes by a state to attack the manufacturers of firearms and put them out of business. So what we have done is put together a case trying to say that they are federally licensed first, that their records are protected from the state coming in and taking them over, that the state is not permitted to start a registry of gun owners, and that if the state is in fact going to regulate dealers in firearms, they cannot do so at a level that targets the industry and has a goal to put them out of business. It's been a big undertaking. The complaint itself is 126 pages, full of very detailed information and cost computations as to how these laws impact not only the plaintiffs, but dealers across the state of New York.
So I think my biggest concern about something like this, about the government getting a hold of this, is what you did mention, is getting a registration, particularly with what we saw with that Governor Phil Murphy did in New Jersey, where he praised the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and said we need to be brave like these people, the Jewish people back in World War II. But the reason that we need to praise them is because they were armed and because they weren't giving their guns over, and they didn't, the Nazis knew that they had these guns, and they were going to confiscate them. So I'm a firm believer that legislation leads to registration leads to confiscation, and confiscation leads to extermination. And anytime the government gets a list of people and the firearms that they own is a bad idea.
Absolutely. New York State Governor Kathy Hochul is actually the first to seek to create such a gun owners registry. And what she's trying to do is force dealers to turn over their 4473 records and what's known in the industry as the A&D book, the Book of Acquisition and Dispositions. So your firearms come into the dealer from the manufacturer, from the importer, from another FFL, and they go into a single book that is required by federal law. When that firearm is sold, the gun owner information then becomes part of the record for that individual firearm. Only the dealer actually has that connected information. The ATF does not get it, even when the background check is done. It only gets a limited amount of information from the Form 4473 that you fill in. So the idea that a state governor is thumbing her nose at the United States Supreme Court, at the Bill of Rights, at the 14th Amendment, making our civil rights applicable even to state actors, is a first in the history of this country.
Whoops, there we go. Now I've hit the right button. Paloma, next, what I was wondering about when I was reading about this lawsuit, one of the major things that I caught from this lawsuit is there's like 6 laws in the space of 6 months New York passed, and it stacked a lot of expenses on FFLs. And that's part of the reason you filed a lawsuit. Could you detail some of these expenses that FFLs in New York are going to have to go through if they want to stay in business?
Sure. And the bill passed as simply a whole. It was passed at the end of session without notice and without any meaningful discussion on the floor of the New York State Assembly, where the Democrats have a supermajority, or in the New York State Senate either. So no one got to participate in this conversation. There were no hearings, no dealers were brought forward, and the bill jacket simply says no cost impact. We went through in preparation for this lawsuit and actually took a number of the provisions, such as the requirement for 2 years worth of video storage, of cameras to be placed in specific locations, both inside and outside the building. This is just one of the requirements. In addition, the state of New York wanted there to be an external third-party security company licensed by the state of New York that would monitor the security. Now, in New York State, ironically, a licensed security operator can have a criminal record. So think about the combination here of requiring dealers to have terabyte after terabyte of computer hardware, the appropriate applications, the downloading, the 2 years worth of storage, which far exceeds even bank requirements in the state of New York. And on top of that, to be paying an external contractor who themselves might have persons previously convicted of a felony on their staff, who are then looking inside your store 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is just one of the examples of the outrageous mandates that the state of New York put through against dealers, designed to drive them out of business.
Wow.
That's absolutely crazy. John, you got something.
Yeah. In a lot of states, and I'm sure it's the same in New York, the Everytown law has drafted a lot of laws and given them to legislators. Are we seeing that being the same case here?
Absolutely. John, you hit the nail on the head. Governor Hochul in summer 2022 was so brazen as to, at a press conference, name the attorneys from these organizations she had been joined at the hip with for passage of this law. What we're seeing in New York is something that has not yet been introduced, even as a bill, in another state. So New York General Business Law, Section 875, and some associated other laws are ground zero for what you are going to see as what I'm calling sort of next-gen extremist legislation from the left. Also, in the month of June, going into July 1st, Governor Hochul, working with these groups, passed the Concealed Carry Improvements Act, CCIA for short. Now, that statute we have seen in several other states. There are multiple lawsuits, both in New York and in other states, where district court judges have issued preliminary injunctions and several of those cases are on appeal in multiple district courts, including the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in Manhattan, and already some of us are appealing to the United States Supreme Court. So we know we are nose to nose, not just with government actors, but also with so-called nonprofit organizations. They are supposed to be 501c3s. They are behaving beyond even what would be permitted of a 501c4. And we're watching a new strategy on the ground, which is for Everytown, Gifford, Brady, and other associated groups to be submitting amicus briefs supporting state actors in every case, starting at the district court level, going straight up through circuit court into the United States Supreme Court. That's a whole new playing field. Historically, district court, just such a minute percentage of cases ever saw an amicus brief. But in New York, out of the 8 cases that were pending, 7 had amicus briefs piled on by these groups.
Following up on that, I've noticed, especially at the municipal level, when an ordinance or a law is passed that is anti-gun, rather than the city itself defending it, they have lawyers that are parachuted in from big law who are pro bono, and so it costs the city nothing to defend it.
Yes,
are we seeing stuff like that here?
Yes, there was a turning point in 2015 to 2016 that in fact made big coverage in the New York Times with photographs of various of what are called the AmJur 200, so American Jurisprudence top 200 law firms, pledging their commitment of pro bono to follow Brady Center lead. And it has even gotten to the point now where very recently you can even take a training course as an attorney for 2.5 hours, and I believe it's $125 as like a little CLE, continuing legal education. And the training is how to sue gun manufacturers for money.
Wow.
I'll just let that sit where I'm just letting that sit where it is. You know, as lawyers will say, the facts speak for themselves. We are on a new frontier of big money, big firms, and a lot of coordination. For example, you'll see an attorney like Bill Taylor, who was at the New York State Attorney General's office for years, has now been hired out into Everytown. And what is it that he's doing there? He's actually coordinating efforts concerning state governments. So we really have to start, in a sense, a new strategy from our side. We need a real robust discussion going on, for example, at this fall's Second Amendment Foundation conference, where there is a mass of persons committed to the Second Amendment, for us to be saying we have to get more sophisticated ourselves. How do we push back against these amicus briefs? For example, do we make a motion to have that brief struck? Because it is nothing but rhetoric. And most of them are. 95% of the amicus brief texts in these cases in New York are not expert factual information designed to provide something to the court they're not getting from the briefs of the lawyers for the parties. So the flank is open for us to push back, but we're behind. We are behind on strategy, behind on maturity, and simply behind on the kind of national coordination that our opponents are enjoying at the moment.
Our opponents have a lot of money bankrolling them. Specifically, I'm speaking of Bloomberg money. That seems to go far and wide. On the other side, we don't have a multi-billionaire backing our side. It comes from individuals who donate to places like Second Amendment Foundation and other groups that file lawsuits. Takes a whole lot of people donating at $25 to $50 a pop to make up for what a billionaire can do.
It does, but you know what, Paul, that is correct. The Second Amendment belongs to the people. It does not belong to a single person. So even in my own work, so far in Gazzola versus Hochul, we have had to raise, I say through the proverbial, chicken dinner, we've had to raise roughly $30,000 just to cover the expenses to date. And I handwrite thank you cards to the donors who send their checks or their donations directly to me, as opposed to through an organization who might write a check, and then I'll send the thank you to the organization or the Rod and Gun Club, for example. And my hand gets tired of just loving each person's name. And sometimes it's $5 from a total stranger that comes in through the website. And it just reaffirms for me that the founding fathers are still alive and well in all of us, in our dedication to the Second Amendment and our knowledge of its critical importance. Critical. Nothing has changed from 1791 to this minute. And isn't it exciting to think that we do this for and together with each other, whether we know each other or not? I just think it's a miracle of its own.
One last question, then we got to head to break here real quick. You brought up earlier about the A&D book. When this law does actually take effect, should it take effect, New York FFLs are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Do you follow federal law? Do you follow state law?
And I'm glad you brought that up. So the answer is that it is already in effect. All of the laws went into effect December 5 of 2022. And then there were a few that had a slightly delayed implementation date due to the timing of when they said they wanted things. So the A&D book Energy Saver was just turned on. Let me just click the button there. The A&D book deadline for submission to the New York State Police is actually April 30. This is the first time since the law went into effect that the dealers across the state of New York are required to make this submission. Now, my clients have already stated from the point of their complaint, November 1st, consistently through many papers, straight up to our most recent, the Rule 11 petition to the United States Supreme Court, that we are not going to comply. And in fact, the plaintiffs have not complied. So most recently, when Nadine Gazzola needed to renew her ATF federal license, her FFL 01 as a dealer, she had to plead the Fifth Amendment to two of the questions on that form. The ATF does ask, are you in compliance with state and local regulations? So we had to plead the Fifth Amendment. We submitted an affirmation with it of compliance with all federal regulations and all state regulations, excepting those that are the subject of the lawsuit Gazzola versus Hochul. And we were most impressed that the ATF has respected her constitutional rights, including pleading the Fifth Amendment. They did renew her license. But each one of my plaintiffs is going to have to walk through that one at a time. Her next one is due next month, in fact. The big question will be when Christopher Martello of Icahn Arms in Rochester, New York, in July has to renew his New York State dealer license. What will happen at that point when he pleads the Fifth Amendment? So any licensed dealer has two licenses in New York, both a federal and a state. They renew every 3 years. So even though I have 8 plaintiffs in this particular lawsuit, they have a staggered schedule of when these renewals have to occur. So stay tuned. But we are, I think the easiest way to put it is boycotting that these are federal records. They are heavily regulated, and we're going to comply with federal law only. We will not contribute to the creation of a gun registry, which is what the governor's attorneys have said in their filings to the U.S. Supreme Court is the intention of achieving these records.
Paloma, we do have to head off the break. Can I have you hang out with us for one more segment?
I'd love it. Thanks, Paul.
All right, folks, we're going to hear from the complete combatant. We'll be right back with more with Paloma right after this. This portion of the Polite Society podcast is brought to you by The Complete Combatant. The Complete Combatant is designed for a broad base of citizens that range from students that don't own a gun on up to advanced students that train often. The Complete Combatant offers several different courses that build upon each other, from avoidance, using verbal commands, and preparing for contact, lethal versus non-lethal decisions, your 911 call, interacting with the police, to even dealing with the legal system in the aftermath. The Complete Combatant courses are a layered approach for all levels of experience that will walk you through all the many stages of decisions while developing a game plan tailored to your skills and your everyday carry. Please visit www.thecompletecombatant.com and make sure you mention this ad to receive 15% off. Again, that's www.thecompletecombatant.com and mention the ad for 15% off. All right, we are back. We are still with, as soon as I get her back on the screen, Paloma Companna. Paloma, we talked about this pre-show, but we've been kind of dancing around it as the interview has been going on. There was movement today at the Supreme Court, which is where the case was always going to be heading to.
Mm-hmm.
What's the most recent update?
So see if you can follow this. The case was started November 1st in the Northern District Court, and we filed a motion for temporary restraining order against enforcement of the laws. That was denied at District Court. We took an appeal to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, where it was also denied. I filed an emergency motion to the United States Supreme Court, which was denied. We went back to the Second Circuit for a full briefing, and oral arguments were had March 20. The case is at the Second Circuit. I also filed something called a Rule 11 petition for writ of certiorari before judgment to the United States Supreme Court, asking them to claw the case out of the Second Circuit, not let them make a decision, and for the United States Supreme Court to hear this issue of our request for the preliminary injunctive relief. Unfortunately, today, the United States Supreme Court said, nope, cert is denied. You must await the decision from the Second Circuit. Then if that decision is adverse, we will file another petition to the United States Supreme Court. I think what's very important for everybody to understand about the current procedural posture, both for our case and for the other cases which were heard on March 20, is that this is only the first motion. So even if for some reason everybody strikes out completely, what that means is that we're all back to district court to start to advance our cases to get into discovery and work towards a merits decision. It has been such intense litigation because, of course, what the plaintiff's attorneys, myself included, are trying to stop is the possibility that our clients will be arrested for violating the new laws before we can have them struck down as being unconstitutional. In New York, violations of these laws constitute a felony E or a misdemeanor A for my clients, as concerns the compliance issues for FFL dealers, which is serious. It's not a $25 parking ticket. You know, my clients could go to jail for 3 years, and we have, if you will, multiple aspects of the laws that we are challenging and in which we have declared our non-compliance.
You want to mention to everybody that's watching live, I'm getting an echo of myself back, but everybody watching live, if you want to get a question in, comment on the live video. Once we get the question, we'll get it up on the air. We'll ask Paloma. I believe, John, you got a couple questions you wanted to ask, right?
I do. We have been talking about, in our discussion has been about 01 FFLs. Does the law affect other FFLs, such as 03 collectors, such as myself, if I lived in New York, 02 pawn shops, etc.? We all have to keep an A&D book. how does the law impact those other FFLs?
The way that New York General Business Law, Section 875 is written, it specifically speaks to New York licensed dealers. In federal parlance, there is an O1 dealer and an O2 pawnbroker, and those are two separate licenses. In New York, it is the same license for both. And so my case does include also East Side Traders, which is a pawn shop. New York has only 9 pawn shops, FFL O2s, left in the entire state. So it's quite lovely to have Nick Affronti also with us on this case. It does not apply to other New York licensees, such as gunsmiths, which is a separate license. So from that standpoint, they did not use federal language. They really can't. They used simply the New York dealer language.
I'm just kind of blown away that you only have 9 pawn shops that can also deal in firearms.
Yes, yes. So we had at the start of things 1,782 FFL O1s plus 9 O2s, which I thought was very auspicious. We had 1,791 different FFLs impacted. I know, quite remarkable. However, just in the past few months alone, we're already down 40 FFL O1s here in the state of New York. Now, I just want to temper that slightly by saying that no one has yet done a comprehensive study to contact those FFLs. 3 of them did do quite loud splashes on their Facebook and website pages that they were closing as a direct result of the laws that were passed last summer. And with me now receiving the deny to the petition for writ that was pending of the U.S. Supreme Court, I have some bye weeks, like an NFL football team, and I'll have a chance to make some phone calls and try to reach out to the FFLs who did not renew their licenses to see if I can ascertain what the stories are from some other persons and whether they might be willing to be witnesses also in our case.
One of the things we often have news stories about New York law, no surprise, in both this show and on the Bullet, which airs Tuesday through Friday. But one of the things I remember is that there was I believe it was a Gun Owners of America case that was up, that went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court as well denied cert. However, they sent it back to the circuit and they said, do not waste your time, Second Circuit, on this. We want movement. I'm putting my own words in this, but
sure, yeah. That's the Antoniuk versus Nigrelli case.
Okay.
Yes, and Gun Owners of America National has been supporting that case. Gun Owners of America New York chapter has been trying to help out with my case. I know SAF is behind 2 of the other cases, and so you see a lot of the groups being very helpful here on the ground in New York. In Antoniuk versus Nigrelli, the difference there is that Stephen Stambouli, who is the plaintiff's lead attorney, filed his case primarily focusing against the CCIA, and he has individuals as plaintiffs. He filed at about the same time that I did, a week ahead of me, the emergency motions for preliminary injunctive relief to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did turn down both his motion and my motion. And yes, Justices Thomas and Alito essentially sent this just personalized postcard back, with the denial, which was very nice. It in sum and substance, as I would translate it into plain English, said, look, go back to the Second Circuit, do the full briefing. If they take too long, let us know. And by the way, we anticipate seeing you again. So it was really very cordial. And I mentioned to Steve, you've got to, when we finally get up there for the oral arguments, which will eventually come in this case sooner or later, we'll kind of see how it goes. He really needs to have the justices autograph that, because I've never seen so personal a note. And that's really what I think all of us are hanging our hats on, because I will tell you myself, as someone who writes a lot, this now is my fifth denial from all manner of courts. No one has given me a stay. They've all wanted full briefings from me. I've submitted more than 100,000 words to the different courts, judging by them all having word counts. So you can imagine how many I've edited out and, has hit the cutting room floor and so forth. So, I really have just been writing and analyzing and researching nonstop since last June 30th, when the law first hit the books. But it was a very classy touch that Justices Thomas and Alito included those encouraging words.
Do you think that those words in the other case will follow through to yours as well?
Sure. Oh, sure. Yeah, they know we're out here. And I think, when I said to my clients today, and I'll just share it with you very candidly, is throughout the history of this nation, when individuals bring their grievance to the court, they are often sent back. And each time we have been denied, I have dug in harder, tried to find even one better resource, double checked everything that I've done, sharpened my words. And so really today we simply have to sharpen our swords, and we simply have to wait now for the Second Circuit and go back to the battlefield. And so I'm taking the denials actually as a compliment. I think what the Supreme Court is trying to do is to force the Second Circuit to do its job, to apply NYSERPA versus Bruin, which they decided only just last June. This is not an old decision. To try to force the Second Circuit to do its job and apply that decision of NYSERPA versus Bruin. If they don't, then I do think that they will be held to pay both for the state of New York, for Governor Kathy Hochul and what she has done to our civil rights in New York, and also the Second Circuit. So I'm taking out of this that there's more to the dynamic than, if you will, simply the rights of the plaintiffs. There is a systemic issue where the state of New York has not been having the federal court support that it should have as against the state government. So I think that the Supreme Court is also trying to make sure our 5 cases come up together after full briefing and opportunity for the Second Circuit to do the right thing. And that if they don't, there will be more than just the individual rights ruling. There would also be commentary to the Second Circuit. They're having huge problems with the Ninth Circuit. We know that. One of the issues that has been up 5 times, I think, in the last 6 years to that court concerning abortion issues. So I'm imagining they're trying to figure out, is the Second Circuit going the way of the Ninth? And do they now have another problem on their hands? Or can they count on the justices to do their job even if they find a law personally offensive? And that, of course, is the Texas flag burning case, a decision that everyone knows so well, where the justice literally wrote, "As much as it pains me to see a flag burned in the name of speech," right? So I think that that's really the test that they are putting to the Second Circuit is, no matter who you are, no matter what your politics are, no matter if you're born and raised and have lived your entire life on the island of Manhattan and cannot understand why anybody living in the Adirondacks might want to have a sidearm while she's outside gardening in case something 900 pounds walks up to you, you need to do your job. So I'm simply going to also have to hold faith that the men and the women of the Second Circuit, and we had a good panel. They were very well prepared for the other 4 cases. Not so much for mine. We'll leave that, I think, for another day, that they hadn't briefed to the level that I would have hoped. But they seemed very sharp on the other 4 cases, the CCIA cases, and we could see a good ruling out of the Second Circuit on those other cases.
Very cool. John, Charlie, we're running on time. Do you guys want to throw another question out?
You were discussing before we started the show that Gazzola is a female FFL owner, and
Yes.
that is a very unique thing.
It is. Nadine Gazzola is the responsible person, using ATF parlance, for Zero Tolerance Manufacturing out of Ghent, New York, with her husband Seth. There was just a sweet irony when we first got introduced to each other, because many people around the country are familiar with the acting superintendent of the New York State Police, Stephen Nigrelli, making his famous comment now at the podium: there will be zero tolerance for those who violate these laws. Okay, so here come the plaintiffs. We have zero tolerance for injustice. And that just really made it a sweet comeback from our perspective.
That's cool.
John, anything further from you?
I'm good.
All right, Paloma, I want to thank you so much for taking a lot of your time to spend with us tonight, and I really do hope to have you back with good news in the near future.
It will come. It will come. We're right on the Constitution. We're right on the law. And it's just an inspiring group of men and women in the case of Gazzola versus Hochul. So thank you so much for helping us to deepen the conversation and share the information.
One last question on our way out the door. If somebody were to want to help out specifically with Gazzola versus Hochul, how can they do that?
Sure. My website is 2ampatriot.com. So the digit 2 a.m., because I'm up all night worrying about civil rights. The 2ampatriot.com. And you can also sign up for e-blasts, and you'll find white papers, copies of court papers that you can download, and so forth.
Very cool. Folks, we do have to step aside to break. We got to get to our news segment. We'll be right back right after we hear from JPFO, right back after this.
It all failed before. Alcohol prohibition brought us organized crime, and no less alcohol. Drug prohibition brought us murderous, no-knock, wrong-house raids.
Police! Search warrant!
No, wait! The crack house is next door!
Now gun prohibitionists want laws to lead us down that same path. Don't Americans ever learn? Just ask yourself, isn't government the only beneficiary of police-state policies? Brought to you by Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership. Information available at jpfo.org.
All right, we are back. This is the news segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. Before we get into the news, I want to get a comment that came in when we were on our very first segment. We were coming in. Our writer for the DGU segment chimed in earlier. Said Charlie has ADD. Well, I would hope he has accidental death and dismemberment insurance, but you know.
Right, he's got that too.
All right, and again, folks, go ahead. We haven't had many comments tonight. If there's something we're getting into, you want to comment on, jump in, comment. We'll get them up. First story up in news segment today is one that happened last week. Permitless carry got through the Nebraska unicameral. A strong permitless carry bill passed the Nebraska unicameral and is on its way to Governor Jim Pillen, who plans to sign it in a public ceremony tomorrow. The bill will become law 3 months later. That means Nebraska will be both the 27th state to pass permitless carry and the 27th state for the law to go into effect. Florida's permitless carry law goes into effect on July 1st. It's going to be a few weeks earlier than this one. Unlike Florida, Nebraska gets both open and concealed permitless carry. Also, it's for everyone in the state who is 21 or older and not a prohibited person, not just for residents of that state. Looking at you, North Dakota. Also, as part of the bill, there's also a statewide preemption, so Omaha and Lincoln can no longer make their own gun laws that conflict with state law. And finally, we do want to offer a general reminder that the Cornhusker State is a must-inform state, including emergency medical workers, and that has not changed. So keep that in mind if you're planning a trip to all 27 permitless carry states later this year. That just, as a former trucker, man, that's something that entered my head when this law passed was, it would be really cool to do a road trip to all 27 permitless carry states. I then looked at the map. That's not possible because the upper New England states are blocked by New York.
And you don't want to go through Canada.
No, you don't. Or New York.
I say drive as fast as you can through New York, so you're in there in the least amount of time. So
Yeah.
this brings something up that that I, as an instructor, wish we had a better resource for. We know the USCCA has a map. We know handgunlaw.us is what I tell people to use. I know US Law Shield has something and USA Carry has something. But if somebody could put something out there to say, hey, listen, it's a permitless carry state, but it only applies to the residents, that would be very handy for people to have.
And there's only one state that I'm aware of, and I did do research on this when Nebraska passed their law, their proposed law. It has not yet been signed until tomorrow, so technically it's a proposed law. When the legislature passed this, I did do research. There's exactly one state, again, North Dakota, where permitless carry only applies to state residents. Everybody else, it's to all people inside the state.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Well, never mind.
Yeah.
It's no. We don't need a book on it. We just need a tweet. We'll be good.
Well, I was looking at the statistics, and now, with the addition of Nebraska, 43.2% of all Americans will live in a state that has permitless carry, another 30% in shall issue, and then there are the people who live in the non-compliant states, as we've been calling them. Those who, like New York, California, parts of California, not all of California, parts of California, Maryland, New Jersey, which are in virtual open rebellion against the Bruin decision. So,
well, and when you include shall issue and exclude the non-compliant states, we're still well over 50% of the nation that lives where they can exercise their rights to at least some degree.
just short of 75%.
Yeah. So now, New York, we're asking you to boldly go where 75% of the nation already is and start letting your residents have their rights. New Jersey, California, Hawaii, and, on and on. But
right, the other Bruin states.
Absolutely. Speaking of the other Bruin states, next story up, we got Washington Democrats pass a semi-auto ban. Bill goes to governor's desk. Washington Democrats finally passed legislation to ban the future sale, import, and manufacture of so-called, stealing this from you, Charlie, assault weapons. And the gun prohibition lobby is celebrating, despite the fact that gun rights organizations have been preparing legal challenges and were poised to launch court battles. The Second Amendment Foundation, which is headquartered in Bellevue, Washington, by the way, awesome headquarters there. Charlie can attest to that. He's been there. Will likely be at the forefront of the legal fight. SAF is already involved in challenges to bans in Maryland and California, and the ban on so-called high-capacity magazines in Oregon. By a vote of 56 to 42, the House passed House Bill 1240, with floor amendments added in the Senate allowing firearms dealers to sell or transfer firearms that were manufactured prior to January 1st of this year and only to clients out of state for the limited period of 90 days after the date of this section. There's also an exemption for people who inherit such a firearm with this caveat. A person who legally receives an assault weapon under this subsection may not sell or transfer the assault weapon to any other person in this state other than to a licensed dealer, to a federally licensed gunsmith for the purpose of service or repair, or to a law enforcement agency for the purpose of permanently relinquishing the assault weapon. So if Dad hands down his Ruger 1022, which is going to be banned, to his son, son grows old, thinks of handing it down to grandson, that ain't going to happen. That cannot happen.
Yeah, when I was at the NRA, I spoke to the people from Aero Precision who make really good ARs, and not knowing the full impact of the law, I thought they could only sell to out of state. But the way this is described, they can't even make their own product other than to sell to the police or military. And I think you're also running into what Paloma was running into New York. Federal law, they're a federally regulated manufacturer. So how can the state say, no, you can't make it if you're federally regulated? Federal law would be supreme, I would think. By the way, I saw our good friend Amy Dillon at their booth. She was representing them there.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. I'm hoping she can come back in the near future. It's, I mean, a bad law, and I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever, that at the very beginning, SAF is going to, before the governor can finish signing the document, we're going to have filed. And I have absolutely no doubt of our success. It's gonna be a little slow getting there, but we're going to win against this law.
I have a question for Charlie here. Smith & Wesson is in your state. They cannot sell ARs or their M&P 15s to residents of Massachusetts, but can they still make them in Massachusetts and sell them to me in North Carolina, or have they had to move manufacturing out of state?
I think last year they came out and said they were moving down to Tennessee. And
Okay.
yeah, so the products that we can have in Massachusetts have to be neutered. And more so since 2016. But we could, if we can only have one evil feature, either a pistol grip, a collapsible stock, a flash hider, a bayonet lug, or a grenade launcher. Those are the evil features. You can only have one of them, and it's a modern sporting rifle. But and then in 2016, our then AGAG, the anti-gun attorney general, who is now our AGG, anti-gun governor, she came out and said anything that is an AR, anything that looks like an AR is an AR. And so they had to sell everything that they had at all the gun stores that day. But we can still buy them through private transfers. And there's a company that came up with a fixed magazine. So we can buy the fixed magazine ARs because it doesn't fit the definition of an assault weapon. So, yeah, we can still get some of them, but they've got to
anything
be
that looks like an AR is an AR. I challenge for I've got a lot of motorheads that are friends, some that tune in from time to time. Somebody get a motorcycle and design the paint job and the externals to look like an AR, please, and then send me pictures. You got to be
Right.
from a free state, though.
Obviously.
Let me get this one in. Dana just commented. I have a ban. Let's ban terms assault weapon, high capacity magazine, gun safety, gun violence. Yeah, those are all made up terms that.
Mm-hmm.
These are all words I have a hard time saying. Like
Charlie gets his air quotes out in the funny voice.
Assault weapons. I tell people every time I do a class, I tell people this. I actually had a lady take a class with me last year. She called me up and she's like, "So could you, use that voice that you use?" I'm like, "What voice?" like I use it so much I don't even know that I use it when I talk about assault weapons.
All right. Next story we got up. This one, Tennessee This comes off of knoxnews.com. Some Republican leaders say Tennessee Governor Bill Lee's 11th hour proposal to keep firearms out of the hands of people who are a threat to themselves or others likely does not have support to pass before the end of the legislative season, or some say ever. Lee proposed legislation on Wednesday to create a temporary mental health risk protection order, an expansion of existing state code that would allow law enforcement to block certain individuals from legally possessing firearms for a temporary period if they're found to have threatened substantial harm to themselves or others. The proposal surfaced hours before both chambers were scheduled to have to take up the state's operating budget, signaling the end of the session, and Lee urged lawmakers to pass a proposal before adjourning for the year. The governor's push comes just weeks after a deadly shooting at the government school in Nashville. That they did not, in the regular session, pass a red flag law. So that's, for the moment, dead. However, Governor Lee has promised to bring the legislature back for a special legislative session. Specifically, he wants them to work on gun control.
Now, you do know that he ran on a very pro-gun platform, so he's pro-gun when it's to his advantage, and this anti-gun when he's a politician. But I mean, this really is knee-jerk legislation. It is a response, not necessarily a good response, especially since we still have not seen the, quote, manifesto the killer left. We don't know his, her, him, whatever you want to call the killer, rationale, other than being personally evil.
Yeah. And I said when that story broke, I said, look, I don't care what that person wanted to be identified as. When you kill children, you lose that choice. That's a her, that's a she. She will be that whenever I speak of her for eternity. When you commit that kind of evil, you get named what I want to name you, which is a low-life piece of scum, among other things. But
I've got to laugh at the media. They dead named her, and they would never do it otherwise, except they're. I don't really need to go there, but if she had been the victim, we would have heard her referred to as by her assumed name.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look, if somebody harmed her or hurt her, then we would also hear that it's a hate crime, and all the other stuff that goes along with that. My thing is pretty simple. I just call the person a murderer. Boom.
Yeah.
You kill somebody, you're a murderer. And of course, over drinks, I call them something a little stronger. But
yeah,
it's gender neutral.
That wasn't what I was thinking, but yeah, we'll call them a murderer. This is what they are. And when I post things on my social media, I every time someone kills someone, I just flat out call them a murderer. Just make it easy on myself.
There you go. Now, the next two stories are related. We're not getting right now a red flag law in Tennessee. That's a different story now in Michigan. The final piece of a legislative package introduced in the wake of the deadly shooting at Michigan State University in February passed through the Senate on Wednesday. Extreme Risk Protection Orders, or ERPOs, would allow people to petition a judge to temporarily allow law enforcement to remove firearms from people believed to be at risk of harming themselves or others. The policies, also known as red flag laws, would give a court the ability to take away firearms for 1 year, with the judge able to extend that longer if deemed necessary. 19 states and Washington, D.C. already have extreme risk protection orders in place. And I want to say, again, this is off WMT.com. This was not in response to a shooting at Michigan State University. That had nothing to do with it. This was coming. When Democrats got control of the House, the Senate, and the governor's chair, this was a foregone conclusion. They just have something to pin it on now.
Yeah.
So I've got a question here. What is the difference between an ERPO and a restraining order? Because if somebody files a restraining order against you, don't they also take your firearms license and take your firearms from you?
They take away your ability to purchase them, but they do not take away, my understanding is they do not take away ones currently in your possession.
Ah, okay.
So I think that can be part of the order from the judge, depending on the state.
Well, and let's look in the extreme risk protection order. If they're that big of a danger, they're arresting the gun. They're not arresting the pickup truck that person owns. They're not arresting baseball bats. They're not arresting knives. They're not arresting the axe. There's a lot of damage that can be done. They're taking away one small piece of it, which, oh, by the way, if somebody really is dangerous, do you think the police coming in and taking that item from them might put them a little closer to the edge?
Exactly.
This is also true.
All right,
how many people have been killed by arsons?
Yeah. Next story as well does go back to the Tennessee. John said, we do not have a manifesto from the Tennessee, the Nashville, Tennessee school shooter yet. And as of today, we still don't. However, we do have one from the Louisville, Kentucky bank shooter. A shooting in the Louisville, Kentucky bank rattled every pro-gun state. It was justification for a lot of people to call for gun control almost immediately afterward. And the fact the killer used an AR-15 just stirred the gun debate pot still further. Skipping down in the story, this is a Tom Knighton story on bearing arms. The Louisville bank shooter, we're not releasing the name, wrote a chilling manifesto before slaughtering 5 senior executives at the branch where he worked. DailyMail.com can exclusively reveal. The 13-page missive describes his goals before the horror at the downtown Old National Bank, where the 25-year-old live streamed the massacre on Instagram as he gunned down co-workers at their morning conference. He made 3 key points in the manifesto, which is in the hands of police. He wanted to kill himself. He wanted to prove how easy it was to buy a gun in Kentucky, and he wanted to highlight mental health crisis in America. So because this guy is on the other side, he buys an AR, kills a bunch of people. He's on the other side, and yet that benefits the other side?
You know, I don't think we've actually seen the manifesto. We have seen him refer to the 3 points in the manifesto in his live stream, but I just pulled up the story from the Daily Mail, and I'm not seeing, I mean, the Brits are going to publish anything. And there's nothing there other than pictures of the guy and the people he killed. So I'm wondering if we've actually seen the manifesto, the diatribe, or just he said, here's my 3 points.
So, first of all, I love pulling this one out. How do you say the capital of Kentucky? Louisville or Louisville?
Louisville.
Louisville.
Frankfurt. I pulled that one on somebody from Kentucky one time. It was great. This is the order that this person wanted these in. The last one was to highlight mental health crisis. If this person didn't have a criminal record, if they didn't have a history of mental illness as far as being checked into an institution, they're going to pass a background check because there's no information about them having mental health issues. So what was the point? Like, I have a hard time figuring out what the point was of saying how easy it is to buy a gun in Kentucky. I mean, if they went to a store, they'd have to fill out the 4473 and pass a background check.
Yep.
Which, yeah, and if they, like I said, if they haven't been to a hospital, there's not going to be anything about them having a mental health issue.
I want to bring up New York because there was a story. It was on the bullet at some point. I do not remember the day I actually talked about it, but New York is also in hot water because there is, and I'm trying to remember this top of my head. It's not in show notes, so please forgive me if I get it wrong. Mental health hospitals in New York, it doesn't matter if you check yourself in or if you are checked in by law enforcement. If you are immediately, if you're there for a certain amount of time, you get marked as involuntary mental hold, and that goes on your NICS, and you can no longer buy a firearm. There was an Army sergeant who got wrapped up in this. He checked himself in, and because he told his superiors in the military at the time, look, I've just lost my grandparents who raised me as my parents would. I lost my grandmother. I'm going through a tough time. I'm having bad thoughts. They said, go check yourself in. He did. He got better. And yet there's no, once you get better, there's no going back the other way. Once you check yourself in for these New York hospitals, you're done. Your Second Amendment rights are gone forever.
And that, I mean, we say this all the time. That's going to stop somebody who does want help and does want to make themselves better, but still be able to keep their constitutional rights. It's going to prevent them from doing that.
Yeah, it absolutely will.
Mm-hmm.
I got one more story here today, and we're coming up on time, so we're gonna limit it. But we do have several anti-gun bills. Oh, hang on. Let me get this. Comment up from Dana as soon as I get to the right button there. Just talking with a counselor can trigger it. That's something I'm not aware of, but at least in South Dakota it doesn't. But I'm not afraid to say I've spoken with mental health counselors, and no issues for me. So, but I cannot speak to the rest of the United States. So, got some anti-gun bills going through California's legislature. Assembly Bill 1252 uses taxpayer dollars to create a so-called Office of Gun Violence Prevention to generate propaganda promoting the erosion of the Second Amendment rights. This is from the NRA-ILA website. Well, the NRA does not oppose objective research into the root causes of violence, and violence prevention is a laudable goal. Biased research focusing solely on firearms is often used to generate propaganda pushing for more gun control. Further, California tax dollars already used to fund the UC Gun Violence Research Center. Another one, Assembly Bill 1406, allows state authorities to require firearms transfers to be delayed for up to 30 days if they were unable to complete the background check within the 10-day waiting period in the current law. Such a change backwards allows inefficiencies or failures by state bureaucrats to delay Second Amendment rights for even longer. And finally, Assembly Bill 1483 expands California's one gun per month rationing scheme to also include private party transfers. I wonder how the hell they're going to do that. John moves next door to me up here in Sioux Falls, goes from one fairly good state to a really good state, and he wants to buy one of my ARs. How the hell is the state going to know if I sell my AR to John?
Registration.
Exactly. I saw. Go ahead, Charlie.
I was just real quick. I was going to say, here in my state, this is the Jedi mind trick that we live under. We don't have gun registration. we have transfer registration. So if John transferred a gun to me, John broke a mirror and had to move to Massachusetts and wanted to transfer one of his guns to me, it would have to he'd have to get a license to possess the guns, and then we'd have to let the state know that he transferred a firearm from him to me.
And are they using the true ATF version of transfer or the Everytown version of transfer? Where I loan you a gun to go shooting, you want to try this out at the range, I have transferred the firearm to you.
Transfer of ownership. We can loan guns to friends, but if we transfer the ownership, then we have to do the paperwork.
All right. So if my next door neighbor needs to borrow a gun for 6 months and happens to loan me $700, we're cool.
Sure.
All right. Let's do this. We got one more. Well, do we? You know what? Let's just transition into the DGU segment. I don't want to go ahead and jump out to break. Let's transfer into the DGU segment. As I say, every time we go into DGUs, these discussions are not legal advice. Some of us are trainers, but this is not formal training, and you need formal training. The defensive gun use segment is intended as information, not as training. As always, the opinions of the hosts are only their own opinions and not those of any sponsors or other affiliations. John, looks like you have taken the one in Pennsylvania.
Yep. Arian Davis, 33, was with friends at White Marsh Memorial Park in Ambler, Pennsylvania. They were there to visit a friend's grave on that friend's birthday. Tyrek Fariel was killed in a November 2013 shooting. A 29-year-old showed up by himself at the party in a stolen vehicle and armed with an illegally modified semi-automatic firearm, which was now fully automatic. The new arrival found Davis seated in a car with his friend. The pair knew each other. As the man approached, he began firing at the vehicle. Mr. Davis responded, shooting back with his own legally owned firearm. Montgomery County District Attorney Kevin Steele stated, "There is no doubt about who shot and killed the man, so the legal issue to be analyzed is whether this was a justifiable killing. To be justified in a shooting of the attacker, the shooter had to be in reasonable fear of death or serious bodily injury. Evidence showed that the attacker approached Davis's vehicle and began firing multiple rounds at him using a firearm that was illegally altered to fire rapidly. Bullets struck Davis in multiple parts of his body before he fired back, striking the suspect and killing him," said Steele. Davis was under attack and in danger of being killed when he fired his legally owned weapon to end the threat. For these reasons, I conclude this was a justifiable shooting and therefore no criminal charges are warranted. Davis suffered injuries in his jaw, hand, and leg during the shooting.
I'm going to jump in on this one real quick. I say this quite often, but further proof, you are not out of the fight unless you lose consciousness. Here's a guy that's been hit 3 times and is returning 3 times with automatic weapons. What are you going to do against automatic weapons with your handgun? I don't know, win the fight?
Shoot back, absolutely. I was actually in Ambler, Pennsylvania this week, and I filmed a show down there. It's a nice little Pennsylvania town.
Mm-hmm.
So,
is driving truck for 20 years. That's one town. I've made it to 90% of Pennsylvania. I've been there. That's in the 10% where I haven't been.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's a cute little town. You know, just oh my gosh, just outside of Philadelphia.
I tried to avoid that area if I had all so.
Right. Look, I did drive 7 hours back and forth to get a Pennsylvania permit.
Philly
I would
is
have
just a
driven
little
7
bit.
hours.
Go, John.
I was going to say I would drive 7 hours for shoe-fly pie, but my permit's good here, so.
Yeah, the Philly is just a little bit too New Jersey for me. I mean, it's right there, and I think the New Jersey attitude extends in.
Yeah, it crosses the river. Yeah, for sure.
Does.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Our next one is out of Houston, Texas. A man pulled onto the Chase Bank to withdraw money from the ATM. While he was at the ATM, an armed suspect came around the corner and ordered him to hand over money. The victim reportedly began to comply with the demands, according to police, when the suspect began to pistol whip him. While this was going on, someone was driving by and witnessed the physical attack taking place. That someone was armed, pulled out his gun to defend the victim. The man shot the good guy with the gun, shot the suspect in the leg and foot. While the shooting might not have been the best targeting, it was enough to stop the attack and send the robber to the hospital in stable condition. According to ABC's 13 safety tracker, the zip code 77042, where this happened, there have been at least 103 robberies in the last year. Now, this suspect will not only be facing charges related to this attempted robbery, but was wanted for murder in Louisiana. This is the second incident where someone interviewed an attempted crime in the Houston area. The first one, 5 men pulled into a Circle K/Valero gas station on Houston's southeast side. 4 of the men climbed out of the car and entered the store wearing masks. Well, they started to rob customers at gunpoint. At this point, an armed customer pulled their own weapon and shot at the robbers. 3 of them were shot. One bystander was also hurt, but it was not clear if he was shot by the bad guys or the good guy's gun. The thugs ran out of the store and jumped into the getaway car. While the bystander was taken to the hospital by ambulance, the suspect drove themselves to one. One was in critical condition. The other 2 were stable. 4 were in custody, and a 5th was still wanted, according to the Houston Police Department. All were young males and possibly juveniles, although the police have not released their exact ages. John, you've got a great point in show notes here, man.
Yeah, anytime I'm at an ATM, especially if I'm by myself, my head is on a swivel. I mean, it doesn't matter if I'm just walking up to one or in a car. I am always looking around. I know my wife does not like to go to one unless I'm with her, and I agree with that 100%. Because what is the best place to attack somebody? When they're getting money out of a machine. Charlie?
Yeah, Charlie, go.
I can't remember the last time I went to a walk-up ATM. I've only gone to the drive-up ATM at my bank a couple of times in the 15 years that I've lived here because I needed to deposit some money, and even then I still don't trust that the ATM's going to work. But I hardly ever use the ATM.
I'm thinking back to a show just shortly after Charlie joined us as a member of the staff. And he's made a great point, and I'm going to go ahead and reiterate this. Charlie, I think you said something to the point of every time you go to a Walgreens or someplace that a retailer that offers you cash back when you use your card, you get cash back because you want some wham, walking around money. And
Absolutely.
I was thinking, when you said wham, my mind immediately when he doesn't get enough careless whispers. But
I don't get any whispers. Let's face it.
But
the whispers I hear are all talking about me.
Oh, okay. Or maybe for internally inside, but anyway.
Right. Right.
No, I always, since Charlie made that point, I make it a point when I go to a retailer and I use my debit card and they don't charge a fee for it, I will get some cash back from that retailer. I know specifically Walmart in my area does not charge a fee for getting extra cash. There's a unfortunately named but soon to be sold, and there's a convenience store chain in my area called Come and Go that you can, when you go in to buy something, you can, and you use debit card, they'll give you a little bit of extra cash back if you request it. I'm always doing that because I want some walking around money. I don't want to have to. If I need to use cash for something, I don't want to have to go to an ATM.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. To go back, it is good to see that this in the first one that they did take Joe Biden's advice and just shoot him in the leg. So that's good.
Yeah, exactly. Let me get a comment in here from 500 Magnum. He says, do you remember the case about 11 years ago or so? Joseph Wilcox, a young who stood in Walmart in the face of danger. Unfortunately, he lost his life. Nevertheless, he's a hero. I do not, again, I've had a stroke between here and there. That name does not ring a bell to me, 500 Magnum. You guys?
No.
Yeah, it's not ringing a bell for me either. I mean, if it was, if he gave us a little bit more about the scenario, maybe it would ring a bell. Because there's a lot of times that we don't remember the people's names, but we're like, oh yeah, that was this. That was this incident, or I remember that happening and remember some details.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there was that redhead when I was 14 years old. I'll remember that for the rest of my life, but one particular news story, yeah,
right.
Yeah, it was from actually 2014 in Las Vegas. Two guys had just shot a cop and ran into a Walmart and fired. One of the killers fired a shot in the ceiling, ordered everybody out. This guy drew his Glock 19 and ended up getting killed.
Mm. Yeah, the good guys don't always win, unfortunately.
No.
This is where, I mean, I hear the DGUs all the time and we talk about them. I always struggle with the whole help somebody else because I carry what I carry to protect me and my kids. And I want to be able to see my kids at the end of the day and call them and text them and all that sort of stuff. If someone's robbing a bank, it's not my responsibility to stop that person. And whenever I hear the stories, and they use the Good Samaritan term, which makes me crazy, but whenever I hear stories about somebody getting involved in a third party, I'm like, man, good for them. I don't think I would do it.
Yeah.
And I
might be a Pharisee.
I'm sorry?
I might be a Pharisee and not a Samaritan.
Right.
Yeah.
And particularly in occupied territory in a state like mine,
Yeah.
I always tell people, I'm like, if you use your gun for somebody else, you're getting arrested, you're going to jail, your name's in the paper, your kids are going to get chastised at school because their parent thinks they're Superman or Batman or some vigilante or something like this, the Punisher. And it's the juice is not worth the squeeze for someone else. But I always tell them, if you're at a bank robbery and there's a guy with a gun robbing the bank, you don't shoot him. It's not your responsibility. But if he turns around and randomly starts shooting people, now you're in fear for your life. Now it's game on. And there's definitely a difference. There's definitely a difference between these two things. So God bless these guys. They live in Texas, and there were people there to help them, and that's a great thing. But man, I don't know if I would.
It would have to be absolute. In order for me to intervene on behalf of somebody else, it would have to be absolutely crystal clear in my mind who is bad guy, who is good guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I years ago I read some book by Mashad Ayub, and get the voice.
Oh wait, yeah, I misplaced it.
There we go. Yeah. So he talks about a story about a woman being attacked by a man in an alley, and a store owner came out to the alley with a lead pipe, was about to knock the dude on the head. The woman was screaming, "Rape! Help me! He's attacking me! He's trying to rape me!" All this sort of stuff. Just as the store owner was about to hit this man on the head with a baseball bat or a pipe, the cops showed up, pulled their gun on the man with the bat, and said, "Drop the bat." The man was a police officer, and the woman was a drug dealer or a prostitute or something. So you know, like you said, Paul, if you are not crystal clear who the good guy is and who the bad guy is, woof, I always tell people I'll be a good witness and I'll call the police and I'll turn my camera sideways when I get video.
Yeah, at least if you're gonna get video, please make sure your phone is sideways and not up and down, because we ought not to be cretins.
Exactly.
All right, we've got we're at an hour and a half, so let's go ahead and we'll continue to be expedient. We're going to go ahead and move on to media discussion. John, you have put up there's been a lot that has happened in the week since NRA wrapped up. You want to tell us a little bit about what you've been blogging about, man?
Sure. As you would expect, I have a number of posts up on the NRA annual meeting. You can find the election report, where about 3% of people, eligible voters, voted. A post on Willis Lee being ousted as first VP. We don't know for sure why. And reporting on the meeting of the members, along with copies of all resolutions. In other NRA news, someone at ILA decided it would be a good idea to pick a fight with Grassroots North Carolina. After wrongly claiming sole credit for the repeal of our former pistol purchase permit, they then attacked Grassroots North Carolina for claiming rifle credit for the win. We have both video and testimony from all the principals in the Senate and House involved, saying they never spoke to a NRA lobbyist ever. As I like to say, they must not know Paul Vallone, who's been on the show a few times. He makes the honey badger look mild. It was a dumb move.
Yes.
And finally, it appears that the Brits want to be able to confiscate your cooking knives as well as ban others. Literally, they're holding a, quote, consultation it's a predecessor to moving forward with a new law that would say that if police come into your house and they think you're a suspect for something and they see you have a chef's knife, they can confiscate it. It doesn't have to be a zombie knife, something I also never heard of before, or machete. Oh, those are going to be banned. So, it's what's going on in the country formerly known as Great Britain.
Not so Great Britain.
Not so Great Britain.
Let's just call it Britain.
The failed empire. That and more is at onlygunsandmoney.com. Charlie?
Before we go off on the Charlie, I want to interject something here real quick. Since my stroke, I have one of the things my speech therapist, who, God bless her and her work, getting me back as far as she did from my stroke. I can now speak somewhat coherently and for some time. But one of the things she suggested is to help my brain recover, try learning new things. That'll help your brain figure out how to learn after your brain injury. One of the things I've been working on is learning to cook. And Susan and I have been expanding the tools in our kitchen we cook with. And some of these chef's knives, you can spend Glock 19 money for some of these chef's knives.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah. you're not taking mine without a warrant. Of course, I'm not in not so Great Britain. But anyway, Charlie, what have you got that's coming out, that just came out? What's going on, man?
All right, here's what is happening with me. I have an episode of Riding Shotgun with Charlie coming out tomorrow. The passenger in the stagecoach is Jill McDaniel from the Mom at Arms. I filmed the show with her in Lynchburg, Virginia. You can find the show on YouTube, on Gunstreamer, and on the OpsLens app. You can download the podcast as well. I also penned an article about the NRA annual meetings being the world's largest family reunion, as kind of what we alluded to at the beginning of the show. You can find that on news2a.com. And Friday, well, really Saturday, I submitted my article for Writing Shotgun with Charlie for Armed Lifestyle magazine, and I think that's going to be coming out in May. And I think that's all the stuff I've done. Oh, I did the show last week with Matt, Carrie Ann, and Renee, which was a lot of fun. You can check that out on YouTube as well.
Very, very cool. My end is just bullets and what we're doing right now, Polite Society. I do have, we're going to have next week when we do Polite Society podcast. Let me get over here to make sure I've got all I's dotted and T's crossed. Ron Hammond of OpsLens TV.
Oh, cool.
We go out over OpsLens, as does the Bullet, as does Amanda's Eye on the Target Radio. Ron Hammond will be here to discuss something really cool that OpsLens is doing, that I am actually part of, that I've been using myself, called Worldview, and he'll be here to talk to us about that. But that's really it for me, that and doing more prep work for AMCON and GRPC. So I think that's going to do it for us tonight. I'd like to thank, that wraps up another episode of the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society podcast. I'd like to thank Paloma Companna for joining us today. So for Amy, Dana, Tracy, John, Susan, Amanda, Robin, Charlie, Carrie Ann, and Rob.
Until next time,
stay safe.
Be aware.
And we'll see you down the road.
The views and opinions on the show you just heard are those of the host and the guest and are not necessarily the views of any sponsors or other affiliations. But hey, not everyone is as smart as we are.
All right, we are clear of the recording. The stream is still live. We're going to go ahead and cut this one very short because I've been up since, 4 o'clock this morning. It's now 7:30. I'm pooped. And Charlie he's got alcohol coursing through his veins and is about to pass out. So
I don't know about the alcohol coursing through my veins, but I'd love to pass out. John, happy birthday.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Very exciting that you spent time with us when you could have been with your wife.
You didn't ask me how old I was. Thank God.
I know better. Right? I know. You don't ask people how old they are. That's ridiculous. I always tell my students when they ask my age. I had a girl ask me how old I was, said I was in my 30s. Another one said I was in my 40s. Another one said I was in my 50s. I told them I'm in my early hundreds. And I tell them that early hundreds. And I tell them that playing music and being around children keeps me young.
There you go.
Okay.
So are we off air?
No, not yet. I am going to shut stream down, guys. Everybody, thank you for commenting, and we will see